Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. This is the first video in a new series on this channel where I'm going to go in depth to a specific artist's discography, discuss what I think the essentials of the albums are, which songs are key, what kind of stylistic influences they have. I'm going to go into that in quite a bit of detail. So I thought, what better start than the inimitable legend that is Nick Cave. Throughout the guide I'll highlight what I consider to be the essentials and classics, and I've done a Spotify playlist too with all the tracks I've discussed, and I'll also be adding links into the video so you can tab open the video and listen to that whilst I'm talking if you want. Nick Cave was born in September 1957 and is an author, performer, composer, songwriter, filmmaker, hailing from Australia. He's done everything. He's a very creative person. To my mind, he is one of the greatest living performers, singer-songwriters that we've ever seen. He has released a disgusting number of classic albums, things that nobody else has ever done before. He's taken risks in his career and they've paid off in spades. So Nick's journey started off in Melbourne playing with a load of friends from school in a band called the Boys Next Door. And they played covers of Velvet Underground, Roxy Music, David Bowie, and eventually that style changed and they started carving out their own sound, which was very dark and antagonistic in nature. Their music is a hellish gothic journey, largely led by Nick's abstract, dark, poetic lyricism. He would create stories with his lyrics evoking pictures of broken-hearted people and sadistic men, brutal killers, really evocative, dangerous imagery. What's important to remember though, his lyrics are also very funny at times, and this started coming through in the early Birthday Party releases. I mean, if you just look at the lyrics from Nick the Stripper, they're both funny and kind of horrifying in equal measure. Nick the Stripper, hideous to the eye, he's a fat little insect, a fucked little insect. The Birthday Party only actually released 3 records, so they weren't around for a very long time. The first record was actually released under their original band name, The Boys Next Door, but it was later reissued as a Birthday Party release. In this short amount of time, they crafted a dangerous and combative sound that could only really be classed as post-punk. It's a dark, as I said, it's very abrasive, and none more realised than on their final album they released before they finished, 1982's Junkyard. This record is a non-stop battering of the skull, full of spidery bass lines, distorted guitar, and Nick's screeching, howling, wily voice. The howling cacophony of track Dead Joe is ear-splitting in its repetition, and the growls that are coming from Nick Cave are just absolutely terrifying. The track Hamlet Pow 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 is like a twisted, mangled rock and roll song. An undoubtable highlight for me is the swung track Big Jesus Trash Can, where the band provide this hellish soundscape for Nick to growl and gurgle his way to this vigorous conclusion. One of their most famous tracks, Release the Bats, concludes this album, and it's a great example of them spewing out this southern gothic tinged rock and roll that's influenced a lot of different sound, and they've moved forward with that in their inception of the Bad Seeds and beyond. So they didn't last a very long time, but very influential, very exciting, and very scary. The Birthday Party split in 1983, apparently one of the reasons being that Roland Howard, guitarist, and Nick Cave were struggling to work together due to excessive drug taking. Listen to Junkyard again, it's hardly a fucking surprise. Out of their ashes came Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, a band that has created 15 full-length LPs and a collection of tracks that sound both elegiac, wretched, chilling, and sometimes very, very funny. The Bad Seeds style is a difficult thing to pinpoint. It begins with the post-punk style and energy of the Birthday Party records and forays into Americana, blues, rock and roll, and gospel as well. There's no definitive Bad Seeds record, not at least in my mind anyway, because every time they release something, or certainly with the Essential albums, they always do something so wildly different that the other record could not have achieved. And in that way, basically what I'm saying is you need to go listen to as much stuff as possible. One person's favourite Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds record will be completely different from another person's. It's entirely down to personal preference, but they managed to create something so wildly different in their discography. Every single release sounds wholly different and unique to itself. The first record, From Her to Eternity, was released in 1984, and opening track Avalanche shows a big restraint and pullback from the early Birthday Party ethos. This is actually a cover of a Leonard Cohen song, and if you listen to what Nick and the band do, they manage to retain that haunted aspect to the original whilst creating an undercurrent of menace. I'll add both links so you can listen to the difference between Nick's version and the original Leonard Cohen version. The band creeps along with a haunting bass line, 16th note snare rolls, and distant organ punctured by Nick's anguished vocals that genuinely sounds like it's hurting him saying them. The next track, Cabin Fever, begins Nick's journey of telling stories through his music, which is something that he takes on throughout his songwriting career. The next three Bad Seeds records were The Firstborn is Dead, covers album Kicking Against the Pricks, and also Your Funeral, My Trial. In my mind, they're not really particularly brilliant records. It feels like the band are still trying to find their feet. They're not, I wouldn't consider them essential, because though there are some brilliant tracks within that, there are some that are a bit filler and don't really find themselves that well. Nonetheless, these albums helped the band hone and refine their dark gothic stylings and twisted Americana sound influenced from legends like Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley. To get a taste of these three albums, listen to Black Crow King from Firstborn is Dead, Muddy Waters from Kicking Against the Pricks, and then 8-minute epic The Carney from Your Funeral, My Trial. Which brings us to what I would consider to be the first essential Bad Seeds record, 1988's Tender Prey. This record begins with one of the most brilliant, bleak, depressingly poetic songs I've ever heard, The Mercy Seat. This song tells the story of a death row inmate preparing to accept his fate of inevitable death. Just listen to the lyrics. I began to warm and chill to objects and their fields, a ragged cup, a twisted mop, the face of Jesus in my soup. It just so brilliantly evokes the imagery of a man that is accepting what most of us could not, that he is imminently about to die. The delivery of this story would not be nearly as impeccable if not for the pitch-perfect instrumentation. A cacophony of snare rolls, 16th note bass lines, wailing guitars, and quarter note piano stabs. It evokes like a judgment day to me. Those piano stabs really hit you in the core. It sounds funereal and final, which is perfectly mirroring the narrative of the track. The track unrelentingly goes on for 7 minutes. By the time you reach its conclusion, you've been battered around like nothing else. It kind of reminds me of watching Saving Private Ryan. When you've finally experienced that horrible visceral imagery, you think, what could possibly follow that? Well, the secret is the ability that the Bad Seeds have to effortlessly quick foot over to something that sounds entirely different without losing any kind of a cohesive quality to the album. To be able to follow up a theatrical and disturbing track with a comedic song about a man's bad luck with the devil is something that many bands could not do. Sure, it's still fairly disturbing and creepy in typical Nick Cave fashion. Oh my, what a wretched life. I was born on the day that my poor mother died. I was cut from her belly with a Stanley knife. My daddy did a jig with the drunk midwife. So still fucking weird. The song has a playful strut, which is largely Mick Harvey's accompanying bass line and this honky-tonk piano sound. The whole album's perfect, it's a classic, it's essential, go and listen. The drugs had caught up with Nick by the time Tender Prey had been released, so he took himself off to rehab for a while. Probably for the best. By the time 1990's The Good Son was released, Nick and the Bad Seeds shocked fans by releasing something entirely different to Tender Prey. They started the album off with this hymn-based track with partially Portuguese lyrics. You couldn't get much further away from the terrifying nature of The Mercy Seat. This album saw much more restrained songwriting from Nick and the Bad Seeds. We have tracks that are awash with piano parts, with biblical overtones, and I think we start seeing the beginning of Nick Cave maturing as a songwriter. Everything feels a lot more quiet and subtle, which is so opposed to the hectic quality of Tender Prey. Nick begins to expand his lyrical themes to love and folklore and dedication. And while I don't think that this is necessarily a classic record, there are some great tracks like The Weeping Song and The Ship Song that have become Nick Cave's standards now. Follow-up album 1992's Henry's Dream begins what I consider pretty much a flawless streak of albums leading up to the beginning of the 21st century. The acoustic-led opener of Papa Won't Leave You Henry is a call and response, whiskey-soaked, bluesy stomping track, so infectious to listen to. The track Straight to You demonstrates the Bad Seeds putting on the brakes in a really beautifully refined way, in a way that clearly shows the maturation of their songwriting that I feel like lacked in 1990's The Good Son. It felt like that's what they were reaching for at times, but they didn't quite hit it. But if you listen to Straight to You, you can hear a real maturing of songcrafting. It's beautiful. Christina the Astonishing is a personal favourite of mine. It has bongos, it has a Latin rhythm, and these whole note organ sounds that go throughout. It makes sense when you realise that the band spent a lot of time in Brazil and were very influenced on this album by Brazilian music and Brazilian street music specifically. As a side note, check out the album Live Seeds, which was a live album recorded on the Henry's Dream tour. It has an unbridled energy, it's really exciting to listen to, and it captures the enthusiasm of the band at this period of their career. So as I said, Henry's Dream, in my mind, begins a streak of albums for the Bad Seeds that are nearly flawless. And then the next three releases I'm going to talk about are widely considered to be a holy trinity of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds albums. Let Love In, released in 1994, is an impossibly perfect record and widely considered to be the crown jewel in the Bad Seeds discography. After the ballad-laden The Good Son and the experimental album Henry's Dream, Let Love In feels like a perfect culmination of everything the band has worked to up until this point. You have the post-punk sound, the southern gothic American styling that's so prescient throughout their discography, but everything in this album it just feels so perfectly considered. To me, this album grips you and never lets go, from the opening notes of Do You Love Me to the closing of Do You Love Me Part 2. And the fact that they've bookended the album with those two tracks just adds to the cohesion of the whole thing. It feels like you're going on a journey into a twisted mind of a genius, which you pretty much are. Here we have stories of love, loss, death and morbidity, all laced up in a nice package with Nick's acerbic wit and distorted humour. On the track Lover Man, the band use a bright but ominous sounding bell to accent the beginning of each phrase, and it reminds you that the band are so brilliant at crafting varied and vibrant contemporary instrumentation, but using anachronistic sounds that recall stories about heaven and hell and biblical tones. That bell sound just sounds like it's part of that nature and part of that gothic storytelling. It perfectly goes along with Nick Cave's lyrics. There's nothing quite as creepy as Nick snarling, "There's a devil walking across your floor," with Martin P. Casey's bass line sounding like it almost embodies that devil with its snaking, sneaky feeling. One of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds' most famous songs sits at the heart of this album, Red Right Hand. It's a classic track that's been covered by bands like the Arctic Monkeys and Fiddler as well. The track is steeped in the lore of John Milton's Paradise Lost, a fucking slog, by the way, if you were thinking about reading it. The story of a murderer, classic Cave, is all the more brilliant for such well-considered instrumentation. It includes another bell sound, but this time it's even deeper, and these pulsing tom hits that come out of nowhere. And when they go in unison, if you listen to this song on headphones, when they hit in unison, it feels like your rib cage is shaking. It's so powerful. Somehow, the band followed this album up with what I consider to be an equally fantastic masterwork, Murder Ballads, released in 1996. It was about time that Nick dedicated an entire album to stories of murder and betrayal, so fuck it, call a spade a spade. Murder Ballads, crimes of passion told in a ballad form, and that is what this 10-track album is. As it says on the tin, this album is a series of songs telling stories of brutal serial killers, dead dogs nailed to doors, and forcing someone to perform fellatio on you before you shoot them in the head. Yeah. Oh, also, it's wickedly funny as well. But on Murder Ballads, I feel like it's the most tongue-in-cheek. It feels like Cave is almost poking fun at these crimes of passion, these ridiculous stories that go into folklore territory. That's not to say that the music is parodic or silly, though. In true Bad Seeds fashion, they use a myriad of generic techniques and traits that they've taken from all these different genres and managed to sidestep something which could become a pastiche mess. It's vibrant and brilliant music as always. This was actually my first introduction to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which in hindsight maybe isn't the best introduction, because I thought that he might actually be a serial killer in real life, as if this album was recorded in a prison cell or something. but actually, it's led me on to love so much of what he's done and what the band have done. Second track, Stagger Lee, is a retooling of a classic American folk song which sees Mr. Lee walking into a bar, shooting lots of people, making the bartender get on his knees, suck him off, then he shoots him in the head. That's the narrative. The music has this brilliant swagger and strut which to me recalls this Stagger Lee character, what you might imagine his character to be like, and the song culminates in this brash, horrible cacophony of noise which evokes the early birthday party sound. This album also includes two very prominent features, PJ Harvey on the track Henry Lee, PJ Harvey in which Nick Cave had an affair with her around about this time, and also Kylie Minogue, bizarrely, on the track Where the Wild Roses Grow. Now I love these two features because what it does, you're so used to hearing these tales of woe and horror from Nick as the only narrator, so it's all in his voice. What adding a female voice does, what end up being the victims of the stories, it adds so much more of a visceral quality. It's uncomfortable to listen to because you feel like you're listening to someone who is being killed by this dark, dangerous man that's been telling you these stories throughout these songs. It just brings his sordid stories to life that much more. Listen to the epic 14-minute track O'Malley's Bar, which is brilliantly repetitious and hilariously over the top, with lines like, "I jammed the barrel under her chin and her face felt raw and vicious. Her head landed in the sink with all the dirty dishes." So here comes the third in a row of these complete classics. Follow up to Murder Ballads, the Boatmans Call, released in 1997. This is a total switch up to anything that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds had done to this point. An album all about love, redemption, devotion, repentance, very stripped back music, so primarily just piano accompanying Nick's voice. It could almost be a Nick Cave solo record. It certainly has the softest instrumentation and Nick's most personal lyrics so far. There's no parody here, no cheeky little wink wink nudge nudge like in Murder Ballads. This is an album which had its heart laid bare. It's sincere and heartfelt. Opening track Into My Arms is a stunningly beautiful track with accompanying piano and bass. It's a track that you could imagine hearing on a first dance at a wedding. Up to this point, I don't think you could imagine any Nick Cave songs being used at the first dance of a wedding. This shows you how diverse the instrumentation, the songwriting skills of Nick and the Bad Seeds have. The fact that they could go from this parody of crimes of passion from Murder Ballads to this achingly beautiful track, this piano-led track. It's just gorgeous. The track People Ain't No Good has been known to move me to tears from time to time. Yes, I'm a pussy when it comes to anything heartfelt or emotional. Whoops. It's another pared back ballad with gentle ride cymbal and rim clicks, this beautiful vibraphone line along with this lovely bass part, and Nick Cave's lyrics lamenting about the inherent faults of the human race and the passing of time. Towards the end of the track, a perfect violin part is added by multi-instrumentalist Warren Ellis, someone who becomes a more prominent member of the Bad Seeds later on in their discography. This is an exquisite and flawless album, and it just cements the status of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds as being unparalleled in their talent. At this point, the band went on a bit of a hiatus, giving them all a chance to relax and reflect on the incendiary path that they'd forged over the course of the last 2 decades. Nick also remarried during this time. We don't get a follow-up until 2001's No More Shall We Part, a morose and sorrowful record with tracks like 15 Feet of Pure White Snow, which has a piano line that evokes the beginning of Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and the opener As I Sat Sadly by Her Side, which tells the story of Nick sitting by the window of a lover reflecting on the outside world, which has these very theatrical string parts that work very well. I actually think this is another strong album. The problem is that it just doesn't really hold a candle to the last 3 releases of Let Love In, Murder Ballads and The Boatman's Call, because it's more similar. It takes moments from each of the other albums and creates a very cohesive and very interesting album, but it's not so unique as those other 3. The next release, Nocturama, is the last release with founding member guitarist Blixa Barheld, and to my mind the only time in the discography where it feels like they really falter. It doesn't feel very inspired. It feels like they are treading water, and Nick Cave's lyrics feel all too familiar and a little bit stale. Despite that, my personal highlight is a track Bring It On, which is a country-tinged track with contemporary guitar lines going up against Hammond organ, and Nick Cave's vocals feel very vital, something that I feel like is missing on a lot of the tracks in this record. At this point, the band needed a fresh take and a reinvention, and that's what they bloody went and did. So in 2004, Nick and the Bad Seeds released a double album called Abattoir Blues and the Lyre of Orpheus. The first album, Abattoir Blues, is a bluesy, wild, life-affirming gospel rock and roll record with a renewed conviction in the instrumentation and Nick Cave's delivery. The album is perfectly paced with tracks like Get Ready for Love, Nature Boy, and There She Goes My Beautiful World flying along at breakneck pace, with the accompanying gospel vocals that have been added, these backing vocals. They just add a new dimension to the Bad Seeds sound. The title track, Abattoir Blues, slows things down a little bit with a simplistic drum beat, very beautiful piano chords with Cave lamenting that he's got the abattoir blues. It all goes to a very poignant full stop at the end of the track, again with these accompanying gospel backing vocals. The Lyre of Orpheus is a very different record, altogether more stripped back, less raucous. The title track, however, is a 6-minute punky romp with call and response vocals, this angular guitar riff that recalls to my mind bands like Queens of the Stone Age, and Nick Cave's retooling a Greek classic mythological story for the lyrics. In my eyes, Close Out O Children might be one of the best things the band have ever put out. It's a 7-minute ballad with those beautiful ethereal backing vocals, with the lyrics singing, "O children, rejoice, lift up your voice." It never feels anything other than completely sincere, and there's a real power in that. At the point between this release and the follow-up, Nick went along with Warren Ellis, Jim Sclavinos and Martin P. Casey to form the band Grinderman, which was a garage rock side project. I'm not going to go into Grinderman too much because quite frankly this video is so fucking long already, so I won't bore you too much. Go and listen to the first Grinderman, really fantastic record, really interesting experimental guitar noises, kind of quite psychedelic as well, but also very garage rocky. And Grinderman 2 is very good as well. So with a newly invigorated Nick and a terrifying handlebar moustache to boot, we reach 2008 release Dig Lazarus Dig, which is an album that's clearly inspired by the music of Grinderman in ethos, if not in style specifically. This record is upbeat, edgy and colourful, and it uses some of those guitar effects-laden sounds to accent the sounds on this record. Otherwise, the music on this album is acoustic guitar focused with that requisite Hammond organ. One interesting development in their sound is they've still got backing vocals, but this time it's not gospel sound, it's the band itself, which for me adds to that garage rock aesthetic. These tracks are vigorous jams with songs like the brilliantly rocking Today's Lesson, which feels like it reaches its conclusion at like a breakneck pace, and then songs like Moonland, which is this meandering psychedelic sound that's propelled by Nick Cave's vigorous vocal delivery. Title track Dig Lazarus Dig is a brilliant retelling of the biblical Lazarus story, only this time he's come to life and he's wandering around American cities and having a bit of an existential crisis. The music's very rock stompy as well. It's got that brilliant Hammond organ sound in it. It makes you want to click your fingers and kind of dance along to it. I won't do either of those things right now. The despondent sway of Jesus of the Moon is a brilliantly melancholic track, which to me just again evokes the ability the Bad Seeds have of existing in the contemporary present sound, but also in those sounds of the past. And that's it. Until 2013. During this time, the second Grinderman album was released. Nick released his second book, The Death of Bunny Monroe. He worked on countless film scores with Warren Ellis, got involved in some film production. There's so much there to discover, but we haven't got time. I don't have time to do it on this video, so you'll have to go and do that yourself. So when we hit 2013, Nick and the Bad Seeds announced Push the Sky Away, and they announced it with the single track We Know Who You Are, which is a brittle, fragile, but warm track, and it has electronic drums on it. Yeah, electronic drums. And Nick's delivery is just more mournful than ever. It's an unbelievably beautiful track, and it turns out to be a very good representation of the album Push the Sky Away as a whole. I mean, somehow they managed to pull out another essential record this far on into their career. This is also bearing in mind that I would consider Abattoir Blues and Dig Lazarus Dig to be essential albums, which means they have more essential albums in their discography than not essential. How many bands can you think of that have that ability? It's a very soft album, and a lot of that softness comes from the lack of percussion. Where there is percussion, it's very pared back. It's more of a soft, gentle framework provided for the rest of the instrumentation than anything else. The track Jubilee Street has to be listened to for its beautiful slow burn. Live, they actually turn it into a way more raucous track. I saw them on this tour for Push the Sky Away, and that track just had this frenetic energy that kept building up and building up before the end. So very different to the pared down, quiet, lyrical quality of this version. And the penultimate track, Boatmans Blues, which is probably one of my favourite tracks on the album, with this gentle fuzzy guitar line, plodding bass, accompanying Nick's vocals, and then this spectral backing singers as well. Also, the band released a live album in 2013, live from KCRW, which contains a version of Boatmans Blues, which might be even better than the studio version. I'll put both here for comparison. And that really is it, until Friday, when Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds will release their 16th LP, Skeleton Tree. This album's going to be a tearjerker and a melancholic journey, mainly because Nick Cave's son Arthur died last year during the process of recording and producing this album. It's gonna be a record of him coping with grief and loss, which is obviously going to be very hard to listen to. If you listen to the single track they just released, Jesus Alone, Link, that is a track which has a melancholy and a sadness, but also a menace as well. It has a lot of synth lines, which is something we heard a little bit on Push the Sky Away, but less so in their discography. So it sounds like they're going to be taking their sound to another level again. I'm very excited. So that is really it. I'm really sorry if that was too long. I needed to get a lot done and there was so much to cover. So it might be a little bit rambling in places, which I apologise for. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you want to see more content. Let me know in the comments section which Nick Cave albums are your favourite, or if you're discovering for the first time which albums are most interesting to you. I'm going to put up a review of Skeleton Tree early next week, so please look out for that as well. Thanks a lot. See you next week.